Assalamu alaikum. In this presentation, we will briefly be talking about the history of Islam through the ages, from early Islam to the coming of the promised Messiah salam in the 19th century. We hope you find the presentation interesting and get to learn something new. To set the scene, let us first revisit the Arab world before the birth of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. You may remember that the Holy Prophet ﷺ was born to the Quraysh tribe in the city of Mecca in 570 AD. Mecca, like the rest of the Arab world at the time, was a tribal city, meaning that everyone belonged to a tribe, and it was your tribe that often determined your life, your actions, and your status in society. Mecca was a city where people generally lived permanently. However, many tribes in the Arabian Peninsula were nomadic, meaning they moved frequently and did not have a permanent place of living. This was their way of life before Islam, and for many tribes remained a part of their lives until very recently. Like many other parts of the world, the majority of people were uneducated. There was also a lot of conflict between the different tribes. In essence, the Arabian world was not united. Now, 1300 years is a long time to cover in one presentation. So to help us put things into perspective, let us briefly look at this timeline which we have broken into some key moments in history. Let us begin with the advent of Islam. The first revelation to the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was made on Mount Hira in 610 AD. After this, an important period was the migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 AD. Following the passing of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was Khilafat ar-Rashida. However, Islam did not stop spreading with the end of Khilafat, and we will therefore explore the spread of Islam between the end of Khilafat ar-Rashida and the birth of the promised Messiah salam. We will therefore look at the various different states that were formed, such as the Umayyad and Abbasid, as well as the advancements that were made, specifically in the golden era of Islam, from the 8th to the 14th centuries. We will also briefly look at key moments in history, such as the Crusades and the Ottoman Empire. Let us have a look at how Islam spread during the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and then during the time of Khulafai Rashidin. On the map, in red, we can see that during the life of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, Islam spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Then, during the time of Khilafat ar-Rashida, the boundaries further expanded to include North Africa, Asia Minor, so the southwestern part of Asia that today represents Turkey, and some of the Middle East, thus uniting these lands and leading to the retreat of the Roman and Persian strongholds. Did you also know that at the time of the fourth Khalifa, Hazrat Ali anhu, the capital of Khilafat was moved from Medina to Kufa in Iraq? Thus, Islam united a previously fragmented area and changed the way of living for the better. Every single word of the Quran has been preserved and remains unchanged from the day it was revealed. The Holy Quran was revealed to the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ over a period of 23 years. Hazrat Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, collected all these pieces of writings in one place and reorganized the Hufaz, or those who committed it to memory, in a systematic way for the preservation of the Holy Quran. It was then written in the format we see today in the time of Hazrat Usman anhu. Standard copies of the Holy Quran were prepared from the ones compiled by Hazrat Abu Bakr anhu and sent to all the provinces of the state by Hazrat Usman, and thus the standardized calligraphy of the Holy Quran was compiled. It was during the time of Hazrat Ali anhu that the codification of the Holy Quran with the rules of Qirat, so recitation, were standardized. Rules of recitation were firmed up, and Arabic grammar as a subject was first taught. The martyrdom of Hazrat Ali anhu in Ramadan 661 brought with it a new turning point in the history of Islam and the beginning of a new chapter. During the period of Khilafat ar-Rashida, the Khulfa were chosen for their piety and their virtue. However, from this point onward, the Islamic world was no longer united under one leader, and different states were formed, with leadership being passed down based on blood relations. And, as with any similar rule in history, corruption soon seeped in. However, this did not stop the spread of Islam, nor did it stop the advancements, and at one point or another, three more states were formed. The Umayyad state, at its peak, included 62 million people and 5.79 million square miles of land. The Abbasid dynasty lasted the longest, from the 8th to the 13th century, and during this time, development of Arabic prose and poetry, known as the Golden Age, development of commerce and industry, known as the Muslim Agricultural Revolution, and the development of arts and sciences, known as the Muslim Scientific Revolution, all took place. The Fatimid dynasty was established by the first Ismaili Shiite Caliphate, through whom the Ismaili Shiites claimed to be the descendants of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. If you have a look at the map, by this point, the Islamic Empire had spread thousands of miles each way, extending further into Asia, Africa, and Europe, including Spain, which was a key part of the Islamic world for many centuries, known as Al-Andalus. After this, and within these times, as the Islamic world was no longer united under one leader, the Muslim world expanded to various different dynasties, some of which were the Ottoman Empire in Europe and parts of Asia, the longest lasting from the 13th century all the way to the 20th. The Ayyubid Empire ruled much of Middle East during the 12th and 13th centuries, the Safavid dynasty, which ruled modern-day Chad and Bornu, the Seljuk dynasties, which were Turkish tribes that expanded over southwestern Asia, so today Syria, Palestine and Iran, and even the Mughal rule in South Asia, so modern-day India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. At its peak, the Islamic world encompassed everything from Al-Andalus in the west to the islands in the Indian Ocean, which you can see from this map. Another key part of Islamic history are the Crusades. You may have learnt about the Crusades at school. They were a major part of latter Islamic history and were the largest religious wars ever to be fought in the history of the world, lasting well over 200 years. At the time, Jerusalem, which is a holy city for Muslims, Christians and Jews, was under Muslim rule. The Crusades were led by the Latin Church to take over Muslim rule in the Holy Land and initially succeeded in the First Crusade. However, after the Muslim world united and took back rule of Jerusalem, 6 more Crusades were fought, making a total of 7 over 200 years. Despite this, the Christians were never able to take back Jerusalem. At the time, the Muslim world was politically and military-wise stronger than Europe, as well as scientifically and culturally advanced. From their time in the Islamic world, the Europeans were influenced in architectural design, science, medicine, new approaches, and even took back a numerical system that was easier than Roman numerals, all influences that we still see to this day. Did you know that the oldest established university is the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, which was established in Morocco around 857 AD by a Muslim woman, Fatima al-Fihri, at a time where in the rest of the world women could not even pursue an education? The Golden Age of Islam is said to have spanned from the 8th to the 14th century. During this time, advancements were made by famous scientists, poets, mathematicians, philosophers, astronomers, and physicians. Though much of their work was groundbreaking in itself, they also corrected many previous writings and theories from Greek and Roman scholars. Great strides were also made by Muslims in literature, in architecture, trade, poetry, and infrastructure. Of key interest is a part of the Islamic world that was known as Al-Andalus, what we know today as modern-day Spain and Portugal. Al-Andalus became a major educational centre for Europe and the land around the Mediterranean Sea, as well as a channel for cultural and scientific exchange between the Islamic and Christian worlds. It is where people went to learn and to teach, and it was the place that became renowned for its advancement and academic successes of the time. Some notable Muslims with great influence from Al-Andalus include Ibn Rushd, also known as Averroes. In the Western world, he was known as the commentator and father of rationalism. He was an Islamic religious philosopher who integrated Islamic traditions with ancient Greek thought, and he wrote more than 100 books and treatises, including numerous commentaries on Aristotle. We also have al-Zahwari, or Abul Qasis as he was known as. He was a physician, surgeon, and chemist considered to be the greatest surgeon of the Middle Ages and referred to as the father of modern surgery. His principal work was a 30-volume encyclopedia of medical practices, which was later translated into Latin, becoming highly popular and commonly used as the standard textbook in Europe for the next 500 years. There were also many political and social effects that Islam had on the lands it spread to. Here, we will talk about some of these impacts in Africa, which was the first continent into which Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula. Following the spread of Islam, most of the Muslim rulers of Western Sudan therefore adopted the Muslim systems of justice and taxation. Thus, Islam promoted a more efficient administration in some of the states, since it enabled the rulers to employ educated Muslims as secretaries, administrators, judges, and diplomats. Islam also introduced literacy as well as Muslim education into West Africa. Literacy made it possible for scholars to preserve the history and the oral traditions of some of the states in books. Examples of such books are the Tahrik-e-Sudan and Tahrik-e-al-Fatash, the Chronicle of the Seeker, renowned works by famous Muslim scholars, which has enabled the preservation of the history of Africa at the time. It is also interesting to learn about specific inventions and advances of the Golden Age. Here we talk about medicine in specific. We've already mentioned al-Zahwari in his encyclopedia, but did you know that he also invented around 200 surgical instruments, which are still used today? And did you know that modern hospitals, as we see them today, are based on early models from the Islamic world? Other notable advances include those made by Al-Razi, who first used opium as an anesthetic and mentioned drugs for chemotherapy well in advance of his time. Or we have Ibn Sina, who was known as the law of medicine and the prince of physicians. During this time, the whole academic world, Muslim and non-Muslim, learned and were inspired from each other, forming the basis of the knowledge that we use today. Within maths, Muslim scholars greatly contributed to our understanding of algebra, negative numbers, quadratic and cubic equations, all of which form a basic part of our education today. Within astronomy and science, Ibn Haytham was the first to demonstrate how our eyes perceive light, while Ibn Yunus found that the Earth rotated 1 degree every 70 years rather than 100 years as was originally thought. Maryam al-Astaralabi was a Syrian woman who developed instruments for astronomy in the 10th century, which were then used to measure asteroids and planets. Abdul Rahman al-Sufi was the first astronomer to observe the Andromeda galaxy. And did you also know that the first observatory ever to be built was built in the 8th century in Baghdad? Within philosophy, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd interpreted the works of Aristotle in addition to their own ideologies, and thus the influence of Islamic philosophers in Europe was particularly strong in natural philosophy, psychology, and metaphysics. Here we also have a list of some of the most interesting inventions that you may not have known could be contributed to Muslims. The first and foremost, one that you see everywhere, is coffee. Coffee is known to have been brewed by a Muslim shepherd Khalid, who noticed his sheep became more energized when eating berries from the coffee plant. Then we have the flying machine. The first person to ever make a real attempt to build a flying machine was the scientist Abbas ibn Firnas in Al-Andalus in the 9th century. And though the toothbrush was not invented by Muslims, however, the act of brushing our teeth was popularized and normalized by the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ with the use of a twig from the miswak tree. Today, substances similar to miswak are used in toothpaste. Then we have the crank. Many of the basics of modern automatics were first put to use in the Muslim world, including the revolutionary crank connecting rod system. By converting rotary motion to linear motion, The crank enables the lifting of heavy objects with relative ease. This technology, discovered by Al-Jazari in the 12th century, exploded across the globe, leading to everything from the bicycle to the internal combustion engine. Hunayn al-Abadi was the first to make a detailed drawing of the anatomy of the eye, and Tahbid al-Harani was the first to propose a treatment for a lazy eye. Al-Idrisi introduced the world map in the 12th century, which is regarded as the most elaborate and complete description of the world made at the time. Ibn al-Hatim revolutionized optics and invented the first pinhole camera after noticing the way the light came through a hole in window shutters. Then he worked out that the smaller the hole, the better the picture, and was able to set up the first camera obscura. And it's very interesting to learn that it was Muslim scholars in the past who have aided in these discoveries. As we mentioned, at its peak, the Islamic world encompassed everything from Al-Andalus in the west to the islands in the Indian Ocean, which you can see from the map. This is something we often do not realize, that for a large part of history, Islam had spread to parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Today, the world's Muslim population is still centered around the Arabian Peninsula, the Middle East, and North Africa. However, the influence in our way of life from contributions of the Islamic world is seen everywhere. We hope this presentation helped you understand how vast a history we have. Jazakallah for listening to this presentation.